Welcome, everyone, to the Roundtable, the editors and publishers podcast here at the American Mind at the Claremont Institute. I'm your host this week, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute, publisher of the Claremont Review books and the American Mind. I'm joined by a motley crew. Mike Sabo, managing editor of the American Mind, Spencer Clavin, colossus bestriding American Mind and CRB, but assistant editor of Claremont Review books, and our sometimes guest now, Andrew Beck, vice president of communications at the Claremont Institute, where he's on loan part of his time from his firm that he founded, Beck and Stone. Well, we of course have to start today with the federal takeover of DC for policing. There's a new sheriff in DC, and his name is Donald J. Trump. Trump has declared a state of emergency in Washington, D.C. Axios reports that he's been thinking about this problem and kind of obsessed with it for a while. He's thought that D.C. is kind of a dump with its violent crime and street gangs and rowdy Utes rampaging about at all hours of the day. But the recent beating of the young Doge staffer, the now infamous Big Balls from his online handle from years ago, which we discussed last week, was the last straw for Trump. He asked his team to drop a plan and get control of this. And so we have Pam Bondi basically being in charge of the MPD, the Metro Police Department in DC, which she and the president are allowed to undertake and authorize under the Home Rule Act of 1973. The National Guard has been mobilized. Mayor Bowser griped a little bit in DC, but she's actually, it turns out, had a decent working relationship with Trump. At his initiation, it sounds like he told her at one meeting, according to insiders a while back, that she should come to him if she needs anything. They might not agree, Trump said, but she can always come to him. And I guess relations have been somewhat, at least cordial since then. So she's griped a little bit, but basically she has said that more police presence in DC is good because she's intimately acquainted with the violent crime problem in DC. The left is saying that this is all illegitimate. It's unprecedented. It's just a ploy by Trump to distract from other bad news, from bad job numbers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics dust up where the head of BLS was removed for bad job numbers claimed by the administration to be kind of cooked or rampantly cooked in recent years to hurt Trump is the backdrop for some of that. That's some of the bad news he's distracting from. The Epstein files being another. But it seems like, at least from Axios, is reporting that Trump has been independently concerned about this problem and has decided to do something about it. It remains to be seen what kind of issue this is with the public. You would think it would be another 80-20 issue, and it probably is nationwide, or maybe close to it, maybe 60-40, 70-30. People can look at the numbers. DC proper, probably not, given the very partisan makeup of that city, with routine election results in recent years being, 10-1 or 8-1, 8-2 in favor of Democrats. So there's been a lot of anecdotal stuff on the right. Isaac Shore just wrote a piece in the American Spectator World about his brush with death in DC at 10 a.m. on a Saturday, getting a bullet hole through his windshield, calling MPD, them showing up 30 minutes later, even though the nearest police station was a 2-minute walk. There's all sorts of stories like this. Our friend Rachel Bovard, and former fellow, was on X to say, she's been in DC now for over a decade. She used to enjoy walking around quite a bit, eating lunch in the park. She does not anymore in the district for obvious reasons. I actually have one anecdote, and it's even older than that. I think one of my friends from middle school, who I ran into later, recounted that maybe 12 years ago, he was at a house party late in Adams Morgan, and he was sort of walking down the steps with a friend, and some guy tried to mug them, and he ended up getting shot in the stomach. Luckily, recovered from it. But those who don't know DC, Adams Morgan is maybe a little less so now, but especially back then, it's always been on sort of the edge of a bad neighborhood up in the Northwest, up towards Woodley Park. So this is not a surprise to most of us. The Democrats have walked out, and the media has walked out this talking point that, well, this is ridiculous. It's obviously made up because Trump obviously wants to distract from other issues. Our evidence is that actually violent crime is way down. And that's true, but it's true in the sense that 2023 was the most violent year in DC in 30 years. So obviously there would be a decline after a kind of ramp up post-COVID. those who've been to DC know that COVID hit DC particularly hard. It looked like a kind of a half wasteland for at least a couple of years after COVID, and violent crime has been up quite a bit. Prosecutions are still pretty lackluster. And so this is the state of affairs. Just some comparative stats before we open the floor for everyone's comment. One fun fact that actually I didn't know: this summer there's been an 11 p.m. curfew for 17-year-olds and younger in the district since early July, and it's going to last through August. So this is true in big cities across the country. Summer is the time for whiling out, and so kids are out of school, people have not enough to do, kids are kind of let loose. So it would make sense that crime would spike, especially the hallmark of recent unease in crime-ridden DC, the ubiquity of carjackings. So much so that Mayor Bowser, I think it was a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, they started handing out free air tags for everyone to put in their cars to track their stolen vehicles. So that's the state of affairs that Trump wants to fix. Just some homicide rates. Violent crime would put this in even starker relief, but let's be, I guess, more generous and just look at homicide. So DC homicides in 2024, which is the last full year we have, and granted, this was down 30% or so from the year prior, 27 per 100,000 people. New York City in 2024, 4.5 per 100,000. Los Angeles, 8 per 100,000. London, 1.2 per 100,000. Paris, 1.8 per 100,000. Sydney, Australia, 1 for 100,000. Toronto, 2 for 100,000. Mexico City, 8 for 100,000. The comparable city abroad for a homicide rate is Rio de Janeiro, 20 to 30 per 100,000. For some context, one of the most violent cities in the world, Johannesburg, 41 per 100,000. And then the leader in the United States, at least in 2024, was New Orleans at about 70 per 100,000. So this is clearly not a solution in search of a problem. It's the opposite. And so I think as this plays out, especially if you see a dramatic drop, which I suspect you will, I think Trump will look better and better on this. And you'll see this actually amongst some Democrats. The smarter ones are walking careful line between freaking out too much about this and going full blue sky, which would be to suggest that this is another dry run for a full fascistic takeover of America. Alligator Alcatraz, now this, deportations, it's all of a piece. Whereas I think the general public will probably warm to this idea, especially to the extent that we should see pretty rapid drops in crime across DC. Now, what to do after 30 days is a whole separate question. Congress could get involved and extend this supervision, but we'll see. I, for one, as a frequent visitor to DC, welcome this development. We should also remember, too, that the cognitive dissonance is easy for a lot of DC because a lot of the media and bureaucracy don't live in the district. They live in Northern Virginia. So we are just talking about the district, which is a lot worse than Northern Virginia, although maybe comparable to parts of urban Maryland, especially Baltimore. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I can't wait for the Democrats fresh off their campaign on behalf of trans felons and MS-13 members wrongfully deported to the bad place will now be coming out in favor of the very popular American institution getting murdered. This is like a really amazing knack that Trump has in his second term of forcing Democrats to come out in favor of the 20% side of 80-20 issues. What's great about this one is that this is actually a plank of the radical left position in this country, is that crime should be legal. We should basically allow, especially nonviolent, but in some cases violent crime, if it aligns with the policy agenda and aspirations of the left. You're right, Ryan. The newly chastened Democrat Party has been somewhat more hesitant to really come forward with that point of view. They're going more with the authoritarian line that they've been trying to sell. One of the Tims, probably Tim Walz, maybe Tim Kaine, who knows, basically said this is the road to authoritarianism. We'll see how that works for them. But I thought Trump had a really good line, actually, that I'd like to see him press more. He was reaching out. I think he was talking to the press, but just saying generally, you guys are more to the left, and I know that we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. But, and he said in his typically Trumpian fashion, but you don't want to get raped and murdered and killed. I mean, so like, as always, you could imagine that being said in a slightly more delicate way, but fundamentally, it's very on message. And I wonder whether, I mean, this is clearly a demonstration aimed at the whole of the country, not simply at DC. He's not trying to pick up, the 4 to 5 convincible voters in DC specifically that he can get to vote for Republicans in the midterms. He's demonstrating a position and letting the Democrats take the opposite position, so that, yeah, people will have yet another like roundly popular thing, namely Law and Order, to associate with them. Yeah, I don't think this. I mean, we talked last week about the immediate impetus for this. I think it was this grotesque event with big balls, and it reflects a reality that everyone knows when you go into these major American cities, that the situation has become unsustainable. And Democrats talking about the crime rates going down is yet another instance of their favorite thing to do, which is to congratulate themselves on fixing problems that they caused with their overreaction to COVID. So I just don't know that there's a lot of positions available to the Democrats here, all of them quite weak. And I think Trump, for whatever his many flaws may be, has probably made a smart move here.
There's a reason why the NBA basketball team there, used to be called the Washington Bullets. I mean, Washington, D.C. has had a crime problem for a long time. Yeah, as the Democrats pointed out, okay, it's a 30-year low, but comparable to what? Adrian Vermeule actually had a great tweet about this where he kind of said, okay, there are crime stats, sure, and that means something. But there's also the daily things that everybody experiences. I mean, try going to Union Station without getting accosted by someone homeless right outside, without somebody following you, without harassment. I worked in DC 2015 to 2016, and steadily, even over that year, saw it was getting worse and worse and worse. My wife actually worked pretty much right actually across the street from me at Hillsdale's Kirby Center. And there was definitely one time where, she kind of came out of the metro. Somebody was talking to her right away and actually started following her. And that was like that back in 2015, 2016. And you just read anecdote after anecdote from, mainly people on the right, but also some people on the left who, are honest about what's going on. And it's gotten a whole lot worse since then. So do we just shove these experiences aside because of, quote, stats? I mean, of course not. This is a problem. And, Trump obviously is doing what he sees fit to try to at least solve some of it. Like Ryan pointed out, this is a 30-day measure, so we'll see what happens after that. But I mean, the idea that this is some, harbinger of some national takeover is absolutely insane. The guy's the president already. I mean, if he wanted to do what the Democrats said that is in his heart that he wants to do, I mean, don't you think he would have tried to do that already? Take over the military, take out people. I mean, none of that is happening. And it's like they attribute, sometimes I think to his most, fervent supporters where, he's playing, 16D chess or whatever. I think you see sometimes the Democrats are doing that too. It's like, you really think Trump simultaneously is that stupid, but that smart to be rolling out some absolute national tyranny? I mean, that is just absolutely foolish and fanciful. And that's probably why you see actually a majority of the Democrats really not go into that line at all. They experience these things. Again, this is another smart move by Trump. It's really an 80-20 issue, I'm sure. Majority of the people in the United States, especially around DC, are probably going to be on Trump's side. Even those who voted for Hillary Clinton, who voted for Joe Biden. Obviously, DC is a heavily liberal area, but even with that said, this is just something that it kind of cuts across partisan lines. So I think it's just another smart move from Trump.
I'm on the record in the New Yorker for saying that Trump represents this father figure. And there's a bunch of these lowlifes and folks that don't have the best interest at heart of the nation who have all taken up residency there. And of course, I'm making the parallel to Odysseus returning home to Ithaca. And the state of Washington, I think, affects Trump more deeply than we might think, because he wants to be proud of the house that he lives in. This is cued in, I think, even to the improvements that he's trying to make to the White House, the expansions, and people can debate about matters of taste. But the bottom line is Trump sees this as home. He wants Americans to treat this like it's their home. And we have simply let our cities, the places that we should be the most proud of, the gems of our civilization, just decline. It isn't just Washington. But if you can't fix the home of the president, the seat of power, the capital city of this continental nation, how can you expect anyone else to follow suit? So that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that people, leaders in other cities see this and they say, if Trump is going to treat this seriously, I too will be the father of my city and save it from all these elements that ultimately are tearing it down. Whether, it's by things like corrupt building projects and destroying it through ugly architecture, whether it is through, violent crime, gang or drug activity, or even just the small things that Mike is talking about, quality of life issues. It all starts with somebody saying, I'm not going to just accept this. I am going to fight for this, not just for myself. And this is what you're describing, Ryan. Trump doesn't have his own personal agenda at heart. He is thinking about everyone else. It's why what happened to our dear friend Big Balls, I think, it was a triggering moment. It was the right moment for this. We're not going to accept this in our cities anymore.
Yeah, that Vermeule tweet was good, the one that Mike referenced. And right under it, our thanks to Jimmy Buffett fan Esquire at Jimmy_ESQ.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Who just highlighted, I'm sure, some passages we've read long ago and forgotten, but internalized in a way from James Q. Wilson, one of the great social scientists on the question of crime and policing. And Vermeule outlined the fact that, well, one of the reasons that general violent crime might be down is because people, after that horribly violent year of 2023, take all sorts of measures to insulate themselves from the disorder. So part of the crime drop is from a partial lockdown by concerned citizens at, say, late after hours and modifying their behavior. So quoting the statistics is not enough. The general feeling of quality of life is a big part of it too. And Wilson, in one of his books, cites that the Police Foundation in DC did this study in Newark, and what they found was foot patrol had not reduced crime rates, but residents of the foot patrol neighborhood seemed to feel more secure than persons in other areas, tended to believe that crime had been reduced, and seemed to take fewer steps to protect themselves from crime, staying at home with the doors locked, for example. Moreover, citizens in the foot patrolled areas had a more favorable opinion of the police than those did living elsewhere, and officers walking beats had higher morale, greater job satisfaction, and a more favorable attitude towards citizens in their neighborhoods than did those assigned to police cars. And then a little ways down, we tend to overlook or forget another source of fear, the fear of being bothered by disorderly people, not violent people, nor necessarily criminals, but disreputable or obstreperous or unpredictable people, panhandlers, drunks, addicts, rowdy teenagers, prostitutes, loiterers, the mentally disturbed. And that actually, the kind of drunks, addicts, obstreperous, rowdiness, and the homeless, I would add to DC, have been conspicuous in the post-COVID years in the nation's capital for anyone that's visited it.
Yeah, there's a lot of these blue cities have become. It's almost like visiting a separate country. It's like LA has become a shithole country in the manner of all these places that are not sending their best to the States. I visited Portland recently, one of my favorite cities, or used to be one of my favorite cities in America, and was just reminded of how distinctive, obvious, and predictable the effects of letting this stuff run unchecked are. Another city that is kind of like this, interestingly, is Austin, Texas, which is obviously in the middle of a red state, but with deep blue government. And it's almost disorienting to walk into what feels like it should be a red city and encounter all the same pathologies. They're identical. The roving, kind of distracted, obviously mentally unwell drug addict, the homeless people exposing themselves in full view of women and children, the evidence of open drug use in the streets. Like, these things which the left accuses Trump of being hyperbolic about this stuff. He's not. I mean, this is an actual scene that has now become recognizable in places across the country where Soros-backed DAs and a variety of other ideological operators have simply declared that that their virtue enables them to determine that crime should be legal. And you're right, Beck. It's a shame. It's a global disgrace for a major world power, an aspirant to world hegemony, at least until recently, like the United States of America, to tolerate this kind of grotesquerie in its city streets. And that is what makes this issue so just obviously a slam dunk for Trump, whatever his motivation.
Yeah, I forget who at the moment, but one Democratic commentator at some presser of sorts said you can't arrest your way out of crime. But if we revisit our James Q. Wilson, broken windows was part of it, but a lot of the criminal justice reform in the 90s and forward was precisely disproving that notion from that official, which is, of course, you can lock your way up out of crime. If you look at the recidivism rates in a lot of places, you see that a widely disproportionate amount of the crime is committed by a handful of individuals, whether it's super speeders in New York or burglars and general assaulters in other cities. And so, Europeans like to bemoan the very high crime rates and gun death rates in the United States. And it's true. We do have a lot more guns floating around this country, and we have a lot looser gun regulation. But it's also been just one of these hangovers of the twisted and distorting and often unintended but ill consequences of our weird way of looking at civil rights and the demographics of crime, that we've decided to sort of turn away from a lot of the crime problems in our big cities, because to really do something about it would disproportionately fall on certain minority groups. So it's been a long and interesting and depressing and dark story in post-war America, the extent to which we tolerate these levels of violent crime in at least portions of our great cities. And speaking of homicide, we now turn to MAiD. No, it's not the transformation of the large evil spaceship in Spaceballs, but rather MAiD in Canada, the assisted dying program in Canada. We ran across this kind of depressing piece in the Atlantic with the title of "Canada is Killing Itself." The subhead is "The country gave its citizens the right to die. Doctors are struggling to keep up with demand." 1 in 20 deaths in Canada now are from assisted suicide, that is euthanasia, more than Alzheimer's and diabetes combined. By 2023, there were 60,300 assisted deaths in Canada, basically starting in 2015. Interestingly, and sort of the outlier in the world jurisdictionally, according to this article, in Quebec, 7% of the deaths are from euthanasia, and the rates are increasing. I just want to read the first 5 paragraphs of this piece because it's a universe contained in a few paragraphs, both of the, I think, the ideological and moral universe and the way to talk about it. The author visited a euthanasia convention where they observed a lot of this. And so just relish and recoil in horror. Think about the implications of some of these, the way these things are phrased and how some of the participants talk about it. It is too soon to call euthanasia a lifestyle option in Canada, but from the outset, it has proved a case study in momentum. MAiD began as a practice, limited gravely ill patients who were already at the end of life. The law was then expanded to include people who were suffering from serious medical conditions, but not facing imminent death. In 2 years, MAiD will be made available to those suffering only from mental illness. This is actually a development that's already proceeding in parts of continental Europe. Parliament has also recommended granting access to minors. At the center of the world's fastest growing euthanasia regime is the concept of patient autonomy. Honoring a patient's wishes is, of course, a core value in medicine. But here it has become paramount, allowing Canada's MAiD advocates to push for expansion in terms that brook no argument, refracted through the language of equality, access, and compassion. As Canada contends with ever-evolving claims on the right to die, the demand for euthanasia has begun to outstrip the capacity of clinicians to provide it. Some Canadians who cannot afford to manage their illness have sought doctors to end their life. In certain situations, clinicians have faced impossible ethical dilemmas. At the same time, medical professionals who decided early on to reorient their career toward assisted death no longer feel compelled to tiptoe around the full, energetic extent of their devotion to MAiD. Some clinicians in Canada have euthanized hundreds of patients. The 2-day conference in Vancouver was sponsored by a professional group called the Canadian Association of MAiD Assessors and Providers. Stephanie Green, a physician on Vancouver Island and one of the organization's founders, told me how her decades as a maternity doctor had helped equip her for this new chapter in her career. In both fields, she explained she was guiding a patient through an, quote, essentially natural event, the emotional and medical choreography of the most important days in their life. She continued the analogy. I thought, well, one is like delivering life into the world, and the other feels like transitioning and delivering life out. And so Green does not refer to her MAiD deaths only as provisions, the term for euthanasia that most clinicians have adopted. She also calls them deliveries. This is kind of the macabre scene, and this is the last paragraph I wanted to read you. I should add, too, that all of this was brought to you by the Canadian Supreme Court first. In 2015, this has been a cause of some civil rights, quote-unquote, civil rights groups in Canada since the 90s. But finally, in 2015, the Canadian Supreme Court overturned an anti-euthanasia law, and then the Parliament codified all this the year after. This is the final paragraph that I just couldn't believe from our slightly different orientation and slightly more theistic orientation down south. The details of the assisted death experience have become a preoccupation of Canadian life. Patients meticulously orchestrate their final moments, planning celebrations around them, weekend house parties before a Sunday night euthanasia in the garden, a Catholic priest to deliver last rites, extended family renditions of Auld Lang Syne at the bedside. For $10.99, you can design your MAiD experience with the help of the Be Ceremonial app. Suggested rituals include a story altar, a forgiveness ceremony, and the collecting of tears from witnesses. On the Disrupting Death podcast, hosted by an educator and a social worker in Ontario, guests share ideas on subjects such as normalizing the MAiD process for children facing the death of an adult in their life, a pajama party at a funeral home, painting a coffin in a schoolyard. On that last one, which sounds particularly bad, I should just say, I don't mean to poo-poo it or run that down at all. And we should say in the article, there's some evidence of plenty of these clinicians and other doctors in Canada struggling with this new order of affairs in Canada. But I encourage everyone to go look at the article. One last point. Before the podcast, I was wondering aloud and then just looked it up. Canada has this interesting combination now of one of the highest in-migration rates in the world, or at least in the Western world. They've been importing people like crazy in recent years. While at the same time, the demographics of people choosing to end their own lives in Canada, it's like upwards of 90% Caucasian or white Canadians, a scattering of East Asians and some others. So what you have here is the very odd and somewhat, I shouldn't say somewhat, the civilizationally suicidal combo of your sort of historic population killing itself off at an increasing rate while you import at increasing rates people from other countries. So these two things in common seem only to me to lead to a complete transformation of Canada in the coming decades, as it has been quickly transforming itself through immigration in recent decades.
So there's a certain irony in this that I picked up right away, this idea of autonomy. You see the same thing with the kind of the trans episode and what's happened there, where, the doctor basically listens to the patient and then says, oh, yes, we'll do that exact thing. I mean, there's no consultation, there's no diagnosis, there's no wisdom. It's just affirming them essentially. So you see the same thing here, this radical sense of autonomy. So that's one of the first things that jumped out. But this is such a very sad piece. I mean, I would encourage everybody to read it. It's fairly long, but it is just striking. And it just shows, look, that's what's going up in Canada. And there's certainly advocates, I'm sure, here in the United States that would absolutely like to bring this here. You even have in the piece, I think it's maybe halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, it talks about Madeline Lee, who's the Toronto-based cancer psychiatrist that led the development of the MAiD program at the University Health Network. That's a network in Canada. And she even started seeing over kind of the course of months where the law in Canada, I mean, it's absolutely full of holes. That incurable kind of that wording, that term really got expanded, and it's really at the sole discretion of the patient. And the problem she feels is the law permits such like a wide spectrum of interpretations that it just kind of turns on really what the patient may feel at the specific time. There's really no like objective medical criteria at all. And that the law basically just opens up everything for this to happen. Like you said, Ryan, some of those stats are, I mean, really amazing. I mean, the idea, Belgium, it took 20 years to reach an assisted death rate of 3%. Canada needed only 5. I mean, that is just so striking. And you see the same thing with, the effect of the law here. You see it with marijuana use. You see, I mean, once you legalize something, it is just going to absolutely explode. So you just see the really important connection between the law as a teacher and the character of the citizens, and also too just at a meta level, the kind of nation that Canada is turning into. And I think this is just such an example of what the United States absolutely should not do. And we should really, really study this and really use it as a mirror and really look at ourselves.
I was also struck by, I mean, the notion that Catholic priests are coming to give last rites at an act that will obviate the effect of those last rites if you're a believing Catholic, because you're then committing a mortal sin right after.
Right.
It's remarkable.
Yep.
Yeah, if only someone had foreseen or warned or predicted that this might be the outcome of legalizing euthanasia. It's not as if there were lengthy essays and arguments and think pieces to this effect well before MAiD was even on the table. It's not as if there's an entire tradition of Catholic and generally Christian thought addressing this matter. It's not as if one of the foundation stones of Western civilization, as we now understand it, was the overturning of, as it were, legalized suicide in the pagan world by the Christian Church. Oh wait, no, all of that is true. I mean, this is like ultimate failure mode for any Western nation to be basically going back on this kind of prime core tenet of how we do things. And I will say that I'm not even an extremist or an absolutist, I guess, about the issue at question. And you guys may be, I don't know, and that's fine. I understand that, like, it's very tempting to want to draw a hard line here. I personally think that if you live long enough, every one of us enters into some sort of edge case situation. This is one of those areas where somebody is being kept alive on life support, or they're eking out like a final couple hours of existence, and you have to make a decision about like pulling the plug or whatever. There are these awful, just like with abortion, there are these awful catastrophic fallen world type scenarios that we get into. And those are always cited at the outset of these sorts of discussions by advocates of legalization. That, wouldn't you want the individual in question to be able to decide when it's time for his mother to go? And shouldn't that be a private decision, and so on and so forth? And of course, the answer is that as much as the law is a teacher, the law is also a blunt instrument. And you can only really make one decision or another about this sort of thing. And it's very, very difficult, I think, for people who are politically minded to make room in their heads for the category something that might sometimes has to happen that nevertheless should not be the standard for everybody at all times. It's especially difficult in democracies, I think, where the inclination is always to want everything to be fair. This is something where their life is just not fair. In fact, life is extraordinarily tragic. And the very, very rare instances, or the extremely gray areas where we have to engage with these sorts of questions, are terrible, terrible examples to use as the basis for civilization-wide or nation-wide laws. So I think this pattern of reasoning actually extends even beyond this extremely grim situation. Like the thing where you take an edge case and you turn it into the the rule on the basis of supposed compassion is a very recognizable modernist leftist gesture, and it always has disastrous outcomes. And usually those outcomes are foreseeable.
Yeah, there's a challenge right now that we're being faced with because people are no longer living for something that is beyond the temporal. Everything is very focused on my own personal comforts and maximizing the benefits that I can reap within this life and
minimizing the pain.
And then just minimizing pain. And we have so pushed out of our desires anything that would be challenging, anything that would be difficult. And then you then want death to be the same way. If you have lived this life of, yes, it's pain free and it's carefree, it's also boring. We think of course of Yukio Mishima, the great Japanese philosopher, where he talks about people that go on being born and dying and being born. Isn't it kind of boring? And this is really a nihilistic impulse, or rather gives way to nihilistic impulses, that because you have not sought to live a glorious life, you have not sought to do anything adventurous, not pushed yourself in any way to achieve things, to live for something that's greater than yourself. You no longer have a God above to live for. You no longer have even a nation that you can call your own. Sometimes you don't even have a family or a more local structure that you feel responsibility for. And so why then, if you have lived, again, this is Mishima, but if you haven't valued the dignity of life, if you have not lived a life of dignity, then how can you be expected to die in a dignified manner as well? And that's what struck me reading this. This is mechanical, medicinal, sterile dying. There is no dignity that people can say, hey, I have lived a full life. And even at the end, I have struggled. I have made sure every last breath has counted. That shows a real spiritual rot in the people of the West. And I think absolutely it comes from being disenfranchised. It comes from having the ground taken out from beneath your feet by factors that are socioeconomical, but at its core, it is spiritual.
Yeah, I also worry about the incentives for some of the people around those having it happen or choosing to make it happen. Choosing, I should put in scare quotes in a lot of these cases. And you think especially of, it's one, I think you're right, Spencer. It's what is the line we draw between the decision to go home with palliative care and the slightly more conscious decision to just force that issue a little sooner and maybe with a little more pain? I agree, those lines are gray. But when you make them sort of, I don't know, making them bright is not the right word, but when you open this door, I mean, just think about one of the doctors in here, I think admirably in a way, given the circumstances and what they're dealing with, so that, they repeatedly, whenever anyone asks for this, they try to talk them out of it more than once. And then ask them again right before they administer it, are you sure you want to do this? And that's, I think, the right approach given the imperfect circumstances physicians are having to deal with in Canada, given this development. But you think about all the ways, even subconsciously, if not consciously, in the more sociopathic, quasi-sociopathic, of people around an old person who's been a great burden, or a family member who's suffering from great mental anguish. We're, as you said, Spencer, this is all fallen world territory, as we're in a fallen world. So you can imagine that the wicked impulse is given just a little bit of a nudge in people to say, to rationalize for themselves, and especially with the expansion to children, who can be a great burden if they're undergoing pain or they're difficult to deal with or they're mentally unwell, or take your pick, in and out of treatment programs and depressed. I mean, the children and the elderly are vulnerable, and you can see a scenario in which, and I'm sure it's happening, as I said, unconsciously in a lot of cases across Canada, you're just given much more opportunity to give in with yourself to saying, oh, this is really the best thing, when what you really mean is, this will be much better for me if this person just goes sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
There's a great scene, actually, we've talked before about the three body problem and the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. I think it's the second book that kind of opens with somebody basically despairing and taking his life. And there's a lengthy, like, do you really want to do this kind of process? But Xi Liu, always politically uncategorizable and sort of just really clear-headed and unflinching in his description of these sorts of dynamics, is very, very clever and devious about the ways that those incentives that you're describing, Ryan, are, of course, immediately at play. They're at play in organ donation. So, like, why wouldn't they be at play in medically assisted dying, which, as you say, Beck, is very much a machine and an industry. And this is not even at this point like a particularly conservative point, although I think it is conservative. The argument we're making is conservative. But before this Atlantic article, there was a piece in Jacobin about this, of all places, the kind of radically Marxist magazine, objecting on class grounds, because when you do this, it's always going to be the inconvenient that get off. Now, I would expand that to include unborn children in the womb. I think we've been kind of sweeping inconvenient human lives under the rug for some time, but wherever you're going to get allies on this point, I think the better. And at some point, this stuff becomes so obviously hideous that you have to recognize how dreadful it is, or just.
There's also the policy incentives too, because the largest age cohort, unsurprisingly, is the 75 plus cohort in Canada. And as we all know, or those who look at the issue at all know, that's the most, I mean, the last, week of your life, at least in our North American medical systems, are the most expensive, as people try to do anything they can to keep loved ones, or loved ones try to do anything they can to stick around. And so it's going to be fiscally beneficial for any country instituting this sort of program. So the policy incentives are misaligned, the personal, intellectual, moral incentives are misaligned. And so, we just need to return to that good old time law and religion, which says, I'm sorry, but suicide is illegal. Well, that's enough of that. But I would recommend it to everybody. It will be interesting to see what sort of, I expect this, part of that article says that from the sort of leadership and people who comment on it in Canada seem to have just accepted it, even though it's a fairly recent provenance, as just something like the weather they can't do anything about now, including increasing rates of euthanasia. So maybe it's not too late for Canada, and they can, as this gets worse and uglier, they'll have some sort of national reckoning on the folly of this policy. Let's hope and pray for that. Finally, we're brought to, penultimately, I should say, we still got to do culture at the end, but it's revealed amongst the internet, or around the internet and news sites. I'm just going to read a few paragraphs from Just the News, which was one of the early sites that broke this, that Adam Schiff, to really no surprise to most of us who are well acquainted with Schiff's intellectual, political, and moral compass, a career intelligence officer. This is from Just the News from yesterday. Democrat whistleblower told FBI that Schiff okayed leaking classified intel to hurt Trump. A career intelligence officer who worked for Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee for more than a decade repeatedly warned the FBI beginning in 2017 that then Representative Adam Schiff, now Senator, had approved leaking classified information to smear then President Donald Trump over the now debunked Russiagate scandal. According to bombshell FBI memos that Director Kash Patel has turned over to Congress, the FBI 302 interview reports obtained by Just the News state the intelligence staffer, a Democrat by party affiliation who described himself as a friend to both Schiff, now a California senator, and former Republican House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes, considered the classified leaking to be unethical, illegal, and treasonous, but was told not to worry about it because Schiff believed he would be spared prosecution under the Constitution's speech and debate clause. No publicly disclosed opinion from the Attorney General or the Solicitor General can be found making that determination as a matter of law. But officials told Just the News that DOJ officials showed little interest in pursuing Schiff when the allegations were brought to them years ago, citing the very same excuse the lawmaker had offered. In his most recent interview with the Bureau in 2023, the whistleblower, whose name is redacted, told agents from the FBI's St. Louis office that he personally attended a meeting at which Schiff authorized leaking classified information. When working in this capacity, and I'll stop after this, redacted staffer's name, was called to an all-staff meeting by Schiff. In this meeting, Schiff stated that the group would leak classified information which was derogatory to President of the United States Donald J. Trump. Schiff stated that the information would be used to indict President Trump. So it's just one more domino or piece of evidence staring us in the face, rolling scandal that was Russiagate, and more generally just the deep state in league with its Democratic allies in Congress and even some never-Trumpers, the plot to frustrate the entirety of President Trump's first term. And actually, if they'd had their way, land him in jail, bankrupt him, and destroy his reputation permanently. So it's, I don't want to say it's ho-hum, this revelation. It just confirms what most of us thought was the case, which was that Schiff, who has never been anything but a serial liar from his perches in national public life, was undoubtedly up to plenty of chicanery and skullduggery. I think that's the second week in a row we've used chicanery. Maybe not. That's right.
This is a chicanery positive podcast, and
that's right.
only
We like the
skullduggery
word.
enjoyers
We don't engage in
may
it ourselves,
host.
of course. Yeah, from when Schiff was on the Permanent
Right.
Select Committee on Intelligence in the House. Yeah, he will likely not face any repercussions for this, at least according to some of the reporting on it, because the statute of limitations has run on a lot of this stuff. So it will be, unfortunately, I think, misread on the MAGA right as just another example of the other side escaping all justice. Now, it's true that if he doesn't face any consequences for this, that he is escaping justice, but we're still a nation of laws, so the statute runs, but the DOJ is certainly looking into it.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Ryan, I mean, Schiff, it was an open secret basically in Washington that this guy's a leaker, this guy's a liar. Him, I mean, I remember through 2016, 2017, the walls are closing in every week, every day. Trump was an agent of the Kremlin, of Putin, and all that was a lie. It was just lie after lie after lie. And I thought one interesting part of this article was, the mood after Donald Trump won. It goes back to December 2017. The mood within HPSCI was indescribable after Trump's win. And that Schiff was particularly upset as he believed he would have been appointed director of CIA had Hillary Clinton won. I mean, that fact alone, can you imagine this guy? I mean, who, arguably, committed treason of some kind. I mean, I don't know, lawfully what that is, but being absolutely, directed the FBI. So I mean, this just shows Trump was right all along. I mean, there was collusion. I mean, there was a coup, obviously, trying to overturn that election to try to get Trump beforehand and after. I mean, Schiff was the same guy who boosted the Steele dossier, totally discredited the Trump-Russia collusion for many years. He read multiple baseless claims into the congressional record. I think that was in March 2017, the article states. So, I mean, this is just typical. The problem that I think we do have, at least that Trump has, is that this keeps happening, that bad actors are unmasked, and that Trump's base is then told, oh, sorry, statute of limitations is over, we can't do anything about it. But this guy's a bad guy. I do think Trump does have to figure out, a communication strategy, even say for the midterms, to really turn this into his political advantage, and really make, the Democratic Party as a whole pay, to make it the party of lying, of leaking, of corruption. So I think he can't too much of this. I think you look at with the Epstein stuff, you look at it with, people getting away with all kinds of things on the left. Trump really, I think, does have to be mindful of this and really turn this into his advantage. I don't, some of the guys on the dissident right or whatever are going to disown Trump or whatever, this is more weakness, and that's just inevitable. But I really do think that Trump and his team really do need to look at this and again, use it to help benefit them.
Yeah, there's ways that you can make people pay that is the reason why people need to be punished when they do something wrong is not just for themselves personally. Oh, you will now no longer do things wrong because there is pain now attached to that action. But others need to see there needs to be restitution. That's what it means. Okay, you've done something and now others are going to learn from this. I want assurances that this is not going to happen again. I want to know that we will not have people who are working in collusion, specifically with a very specific party that just actively tries to undermine any political decision that the people wish to make. If we elect a president and you are trying to thwart that president, you're now in the way of the will of the people. And if we can't have a republic that works in this fashion, the people are going to feel that frustration mounting more and more. And so, yeah, in agreement with Mike, something needs to be done.
Tell you one thing, I never want to hear another frickin' word about Marjorie Taylor Greene from Trump's opponents. Like it really is a matter of shamelessness, because this guy is every bit as unethical, as unconcerned with his with loyalty to his country, as brazen and open in his betrayal of not just like the high ideals of American government, but just basic ethical concerns that should govern even the most limited scope of human action. This is not asking like that we have principled statesmen at the level of the founders occupying Congress. This is just talking about not being a total dingus. And there is this tendency on the right, I think, to feel a level of embarrassment about our cranks and our kooks, and even to disown or to express shock and outrage. And I'm not even necessarily saying that's something we should stop doing altogether. You know, I think we need to be honest when elements on the right are becoming unsavory or veering into like conspiratorial territory. But the left simply does not do this. Democrats simply do not come out. I mean, have you guys heard of any of Schiff's fellow Democrats making a statement of outrage, expressing shock and horror that such a thing would occur? I have not. And I think that that's a thing to be aware of, and an advantage to press. That yes, we have our cranks and our kooks and our even perhaps our crooks, but the Democrats are a party of cranks and kooks and crooks, and they circle the wagons around these people, even in their most abject hours. And yeah, I do think that this is more of a PR thing. It sounds like than a legal thing. But it's politics. That's important, right? It's important to to not feel cringy or ashamed about the modern American Republican Party just because like not everyone in it is somebody you'd like to have over to dinner. Like you're dealing in a bare knuckle boxing match with two opposing sides, only one of which even has a degree of compunction about the crazies. So that's like an important thing to keep in mind, and a good reason to kind of keep talking about guys like Schiff.
Yeah, we'll see what reckoning lies in the future for Schiff. It's hard to say precisely what the remedy will be for this sort of thing. It will certainly churn up a few news cycles. I hope we'll see what the DOJ finds out and what remedy they have for it, if anything, from Pam Bondi and company. Well, we have basically come to the tail end of this podcast, so let's talk a little bit, lighten things up a little bit with some cultural recommendations. Unfortunately, well, I have somewhat of a lightning thing in just turning to fiction. This MAiD service in Canada made me think of Children of Men, the 1993 book by P.D. James, then turned into a movie with Clive Owen and Julianne Moore, where there's a portion of it where you see the suicide pods that sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. For those that don't know the book or the movie, the premise is that in the future, for some reason, people cannot have children anymore, or most people in the world can no longer have natural children. And this has created a moral and spiritual crisis as humanity is slowly expiring, and also kind of an anarchic end of the world type crisis as everyone goes crazy. But one of the solutions that somewhat in the future society has are these suicide pods, which are called not MAiD in Children of Men, but quietists. So it's a book worth rereading, and maybe even watch the movie. But as always, especially with good books, read the book first.
So mine, I think I've been on music for like the past 2-3 weeks. So I'm actually gonna turn to baseball. So I'm a Cleveland Indians fan. I do not call them by their other name. And they've been on a huge winning streak. I think the past they were like 21-7, I think. At one point earlier in the season, they were tons of games back behind the Detroit Tigers, who lead the AL Central this year. Tigers have a great team. Riley Green's been having a great year. Anyway, so the Indians have gone on a huge winning streak. I think they've closed the gap 10 and a half games in 30 days, which is amazing. I think I saw Buster Olney at ESPN report that. So it could be another very exciting finish. I think we play, both the Tigers, and then I think the Twins or the White Sox, some other AL Central opponents, I think, to finish out the year. So it's going to be a really exciting year, especially some of the guys we lost. And the Dolans, who are the owners of the Indians, are famously for not spending any money. So even in spite of that, we are still in contention. So it's just amazing, amazing team, and definitely an exciting finish to watch.
Mike, I just love how you still call them the Indians rather
Yes.
than what they are pretending to be called right now. It almost just makes me forget that that's even a thing. I wish that
And you should.
Yes.
I would actually, I remember this, but I forget what their alleged new name is.
Good. Let's just
Okay.
Let's literally not even say it.
They don't have a new name.
Real.
Yeah. Eventually it's just going to be like the baseball players. I like, dead naming the Indians for justice is a great campaign to take up. I'm having my first senior moment. We've been doing these recommendations for a while, and this is the first time that I have something I want to recommend, but I can't remember if I've recommended it before. Have I talked about A Handful of Dust yet on this podcast? The Evelyn Waugh novel?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Nope.
Great. Well, if I have, and none of you knows, then I'm sure our listeners also weren't listening, so they won't mind again. Okay, this is part of the ongoing series. Spencer reads novels on the weekends, and it's a part of a subcategory of that series, which is Spencer gets novels sent to him by his mom. I have a very erudite and lovely person for a mother who's also an incredibly sophisticated literary mind, and she happened upon this novel by Evelyn Waugh, whom I knew chiefly as the author of Brideshead Revisited. Wonderful, wonderful book with several quite excellent screen adaptations that our listeners might know about. You may also, if you've gone slightly deeper into the Waugh archives, have encountered books like Scoop, which are very laugh out loud funny and very kind of sharp, careful, precise observations of upper class British culture. A Handful of Dust presents as that. It presents as a sort of frothy social comedy, acid tipped barbs, incredibly readable prose. And it is indeed entertaining on every page. But this is a novel that punches way, way above its weight. And it takes a little while to figure out, or at least it took me a little while to figure out what Waugh is up to. Once I did, I think this might be his masterpiece. It's up there with Brideshead in the precision of what it's observing. And what it's talking about is something that basically all our listeners will be interested in, and that is the death of the English gentry, kind of the end after the war, after the First World War, especially of the noblesse oblige and the great house being taken care of by the pater familias who sustains the servants on the grounds and so forth. It's about a woefully mismatched marriage between somebody trying to be that kind of pater familias and a woman who wants to be the roaring 20s kind of floozy and go into London and party and have affairs. And there's just, it gets, it is depressing, but in a very amusing Evelyn Waugh sort of way, and manages to pack a couple gut punches while also being light and entertaining. So can't recommend it highly enough.
I'll just say that Mike's invocation of the Indians brought one other pop culture reference to my mind, which was the great movie Major League, which is about a much more unpleasant era of the Indians that is most of their eras, besides recent years. So
yeah,
I'm happy for you, Mike, that you finally have a good baseball team.
Me too. I mean, it's hard to be a Cleveland sports fan, especially a Browns fan. So the Indians definitely help a lot in that category.
Mike, I feel you as a New York Mets, New York Islanders, New York Giants fan. It's rough. It's rough. Yeah, I finally watched the Batman, the newest Batman film with Robert Pattinson playing Bruce Wayne. I was struck by the premise. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I'm going to assume that people have mostly watched this. Is the villain in it is trying not just to murder people, he's trying to destroy the memory, he's trying to destroy the reputation of Thomas Wayne. So Bruce Wayne's father, not just in the minds of Gotham and the public by revealing that he did some sort of bad thing, but he's trying to destroy Bruce's good opinion of his father in order to get him to stop being Batman, in order for him to stop participating in the civic defense of the city. And I was just struck by how, maybe it's just accidentally prescient it is in a kind of a parallel to our times, where we're told to not have heroes. We're told that everything has to be deconstructed, and it goes all the way up from religion to the fathers of your country, and then even just to your own fathers, your own upbringing. You have to be clear-eyed. You have to be realistic. You can't idolize anybody or idealize them. And we would do well to recognize when someone is trying to do that. Overall, though, the film is a good move back into the where I think that Batman most thrives, which is very dark and sort of gritty. The Gotham that it presents is maybe a bit more like realistic, but has this really nice urban Gothic type of tone to it. So just the art direction and the set design is really reminiscent of those earlier Batman films in the 80s and 90s. Not like the very almost cartoonish style that DC really sort of doubled down on with its Justice League and Superman collaboration. So overall, a very good film. Yes, both in like the messaging, the storytelling, but also just aesthetically, visually, very compelling.
It's brooding and dark, both literally and figuratively. So
Yes.
I think the first time I tried to watch it, I fell asleep. Not because it wasn't a compelling film, it's just late, and it sort of soothes you.
So did I, though, Ryan.
Weird way.
I had to watch it in 2 nights because
It's also long.
It quite literally put me to sleep. But it's just because, it's a little bit slow. It's a little dark, and you just sit in a dark room
It's
it's
hypnotizing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Go check out The Batman if you hadn't. Came out maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I think. Don't quote me. All right. Well, we've reached the end of the roundtable, so thank you all for listening once again. If you want to learn more about Claremont's work, go to www.claremont.org. If you'd like to support that work, same website /donate. Check out all we're up to in DC at dc.claremont.org. Go, of course, to ClaremontReviewBooks.com. We're putting to bed, almost kind of sorta, the upcoming summer issue, and then we will have a wonderful action-packed double issue to commemorate 25 years of CRB in fall winter. It will be longer and packed to the gills with wonderful reflections on all matters cultural, political, literary, and historic, etc. Go to AmericanMind.org for the latest there. We were going to talk today about Andrew's Assimilation and Its Discontents essay, but I kind of made the midstream editorial judgment that we've got a bunch of responses coming out to that. Check out one just up from Paul Gottfried. We have more coming out, so maybe we'll take that up in a future episode when we have some more to chew on. And so we'll bid you adieu. Thank you for listening. And thanks to the engineering and production crew, the brothers Gannon, Ryan, and Jake. And we will talk to you all next week.